Hi guys, Sean here from DigiDirect. Today we're going to be taking a hands-on first look at the newest big camera on the market, and that's the Sony a7 Mark III. Now, this has been just announced a couple weeks ago. At the time of this recording, it's not quite out yet, but we've been fortunate enough to have Sony lend us a pre-production copy of the camera. We've been putting it through its paces. Now, the a7 Mark III takes quite a few features from its higher-end brothers, the a7R Mark III and the a9. It doesn't sacrifice too much and puts it in a body that, while not cheap, is a lot more affordable than those cameras that it emulates. And I will say that I don't have the camera in my hand right now because I'm actually using it to shoot this video. So we are shooting this entire video on the a7 Mark III. I'm using continuous autofocus, so we'll see how that stacks up there. Let's start though with a look at the body of the a7 Mark III. So if you've seen a Sony full-frame camera in the past few years, there are no shocks here. This looks pretty much the same. The overall button layout is the same, the placement of all your major dials is similar, and again, we've got the tilting LCD screen here that we're used to. A new feature is the addition of this little joystick that was on the a9 and the a7R III, and it's very handy at navigating through menus quickly, moving your AF point. I sung the praises of this joystick when I was reviewing the a9 and the a7R III, so I'm glad to see it in this one as well. They've also now added dual SD card slots on the a7 III, which is huge. The Mark II only had one SD card slot. One of these slots is UHS 2 compatible. On the other side here, we have headphone and mic jacks, HDMI, USB-C, and a USB multi-port. The EVF here is 2.4 million dots, which is a good resolution, about the same as the Mark II. Worth noting that it is less than the 3.7 million dots on the a9 and a7R III viewfinder, so 1 point of difference there. One excellent change here on the a7 III is that it is upgraded to Sony's new Z series battery that was introduced on the a9 and also made its way to the a7R III. That has much better battery life than Sony's older batteries. In fact, this means that the a7 III is rated for 710 shots, which is more than twice that of the Mark II, and is the highest rated battery life of any of the Alpha series cameras, including the a7R III and the a9. That's excellent news because those old Sony batteries were getting a bit long in the tooth. They didn't really have the capacity needed in a higher performance camera. So very, very good to see that upgraded on this one as well. That larger battery does mean the grip is slightly larger than on the Mark II, but it's a pretty small difference. Menu navigation on the camera is pretty good, especially with that new joystick. While I still don't find the Sony menus to be the best on the market, the addition of the favorites menu that we've seen on recent Sony cameras that lets you build your own customizable quick menu alleviates a lot of that stress. Under the hood, the camera has a 24.3 megapixel full-frame sensor. That's the same resolution as on the Mark II, so no changes there, but that's still comfortably within the average range of what full-frame cameras are around these days, outside of specifically high-resolution cameras like the a7R Mark III or the Nikon D850. However, this does not mean that it's the same sensor as on the Mark II. This is a backside illuminated sensor, which means it's going to have better low-light performance than the Mark II camera did. Also, it allows the camera to go up to what Sony claims is 15 stops of dynamic range, which is quite impressive, something that's going to be well appreciated by landscape photographers and similar. Another improvement here is the in-body image stabilization system. So on the a7 III here, that's improved to 5 stops of stabilization. On the a7 Mark II, that was 4.5 stops. So it's a slight improvement, but it's not negligible. I will say that I do still think that Olympus cameras still have the best sensor stabilization on the market. This doesn't dethrone them. But it is very effective and is as good or better as any non-Olympus camera that I could name. Here you can see I'm shooting at 105 millimeters handheld. There's a little bit of movement here obviously, but considering at the focal length I'm here and that I'm doing it handheld, that's a very, very good performance out of the stabilization system in the camera here. This overall is going to make it a lot easier to shoot in low light. You can use a lower shutter speed and stabilize your photos so you can avoid blurry photos in low light a lot easier. It's also going to make a big impact on shooting handheld video. Overall, it makes the camera just a lot more flexible if you've got a solid stabilization system in there, which the a7 Mark III certainly does. One of the more impressive features on the a7 III here is the autofocus system. Sony has taken the full 693-point AF system from their flagship a9 camera and put it in the a7 III. That's huge and very impressive. A lot of people didn't think that they were necessarily going to do that. That's a big improvement over the a7 Mark II, which had a 117-point AF system. Sony claims, in fact, that the a7 III AF is twice as fast as on the Mark II. This system covers 93% of the frame in autofocus points and is hands down one of the best systems on the market. I mentioned this when I reviewed the a9. This holds true in the a7 III here as well. It's super accurate, super fast, very responsive, excellent at tracking. Just hands down one of the most robust autofocus systems that you can get. And I'm very, very happy that Sony included it on the a7 III here as well. Now, to be clear, this is not exactly the same as on the A9. When you require initial focus, it essentially is, but once you start taking a series of shots like burst photos, the A9 does have a bit of an edge over the A7 III. The reason for this is that the A9 has no blackout in between when you're shooting burst photos, and it can also take data off the sensor a bit faster than the A7 III here. So when you're in the midst of a burst shooting, the A7 III has to rely a little bit more on predictive autofocus, which the A9 doesn't really need to do because it can see everything all at the same time. So there is a slight difference there. That being said, this is still a stellar performance from the A7 III. I had almost no instances where I would complain or make any negative comments about the performance of the AF system here. On a similar note, the burst shooting has been increased here. It's 10 frames per second now, which is actually double what it was on the Mark II. Still less than the 20 frames per second on the A9, but for comparison's sake, 10 frames per second is faster than both the Nikon D850 and the Canon 5D Mark IV. So it's still very, very fast and definitely will get you by in high-speed shooting situations. The buffer on the A7 III is moderate. It's about 177 JPEGs or 89 RAW photos. Definitely less than the almost limitless buffer that was on the A9, but still going to be about 9 seconds worth of straight shooting of RAW photos if you're in continuous burst shooting mode. Lastly, let's touch on video. The A7 Mark III gains 4K video, as many people would have expected. It actually shoots this like the A6500 does, in that it shoots 6K and then downsamples it to 4K, which arguably could give you a bit more detail in the image. That's a debatable point. Now, some Sony cameras have had the flaw that they overheat if shooting in 4K for a while, some of their smaller cameras. I've been using this camera to shoot this video right now for quite a while, and I've got no issues. I had no issues in any of the sample footage that I shot, so as far as I can tell, that doesn't seem to be a problem on the A7 III here. You also do get access to some of their flat picture profiles like S-Log2 and S-Log3, so this can give you a low contrast image if you're intending to bring the image into color grading, if that's part of your workflow, which is great. Also, I was quite impressed with the continuous autofocus for video out of the A7 III here. Like I mentioned, I'm using that to shoot this right here. I haven't yet seen the results of that, but I'm confident that it will be good because I've been using continuous autofocus to shoot many of the video samples that I've shot up to this point, and it's been quite effective so far. So I'm sure with a static frame like this, it'll have no problem because it did a pretty good job when in other shots where it had a lot more movement and a lot of different subjects to potentially track. So definitely very good to see that it has good, strong, continuous autofocus for video. So there's really only two weaknesses I could point out about the A7 Mark III. The first is the tilting LCD screen. It's better than a flat static screen, but it's still not fully articulating, so I can't flip it all the way out to the side and all the way around. For example, I'm shooting this video right now, I can't see the screen. So I'm assuming the continuous autofocus is doing a good job of keeping me in focus. I assume that I'm in the right position in the frame because I've marked it out, but I can't verify that. Normally when I'm shooting these videos with my GH4, I've got the screen flipped out and around, and I can see that while I'm filming. The other thing is weather sealing. This is not a fully weather sealed camera. Now, Sony's always been a little bit nebulous about how weather sealed the Alpha series cameras are. It's clear that they don't, break down with just a touch of water, just a little bit, but they're definitely not fully weather sealed. So it's not going to be like a Canon 5D Mark IV or similar where you can go out in a downpour and just not worry about it. So depending on how you plan on using your camera, these may just be minor concerns or they may be significant, so just bear them in mind. So there's a ton of really good features on the A7 III here, and in my opinion, this is looking to be one of the most solid high-performance cameras available. It doesn't quite have the super high resolution sensor that the A7 III has, or the extremely high buffer and burst shooting speed of the A9, but for someone who doesn't need those exact features, this is a monster of a camera. It's a full-frame camera with spectacular autofocus, 5 stops of in-body image stabilization, fast burst shooting and a decent buffer, 4K video with flat picture profiles and good continuous autofocus for video, a huge battery life, good ergonomics, and good build quality. Overall, the A7 III is a slam dunk of a camera, and I think it's going to have a much broader appeal than the A9 or the A7R Mark III. I think it's going to be the camera to beat for quite a while. Now, the camera is going to be out shortly at the end of March. You can pre-order it on our website, www.digidirect.com.au, or in one of our stores. If you're watching this video after March 2018, it should be available. If you wanted to test it out and come try it out, you can come into one of our stores to do so. We have stores in the Sydney CBD, Bondi Junction, Miranda, Chatswood, the Brisbane and Melbourne CBD, and Cannington, Western Australia. Thanks, guys. Take care.